Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
Welcome to In the City. Each week we unpack a story that's crucial to the world's financial capitals. I'm Allegra Stratton. Chancellor Rachel Reeves has delivered her spring statement. And in Reeves's address to Parliament, she said her task is to secure Britain's future in a world that is changing before our eyes.
Mr. Speaker, the job of a responsible government is not simply to watch this change. This moment demands an active government. A government not stepping back, but stepping up.
So this week on the podcast, we are looking at whether the government's effort to step up is enough to secure the UK economy, and whether Britain now has a financial plan that factors in the unstable global outlook.
Welcome to the City of London.
The City of London.
The next station is Bank. Please mind the gap between the train and the platform.
The financial heart of the country.
The City.
The City.
Welcome to In the City.
Stand clear of the doors, please.
I'm joined by Chief UK Economist with Bloomberg Economics, Dan Hanson, and Senior Economics Reporter, Phil Aldrick. And for those that you can't see, which is everyone, they've both been on their mobiles.
Trying to work out what's going on.
Swapping and sharing. Did you see this? Did you see that? Okay, right. I thought there was a mini spring in the spring statement. I felt like Rachel Reeves seemed quite chipper.
Yeah.
Phil?
I think it definitely was not the sort of gloomy show that we thought it was going to be. The growth forecast from the OBR was largely unchanged. Right at the end of the forecast in their tables, they suggest they say the economy is slightly bigger. They did this dynamic scoring on the planning reforms, which wasn't predicted. They say that by the end of the Parliament, you'll be getting 0.2% permanent growth as a result of these early deregulations of the planning system. They say that adds 170,000 homes. You get to 1.3 million, which is not far off their 1.5 million home target. So those are really positive things. For the markets, the big thing was her headroom had disappeared. It was pretty nasty. They went from 9.9 billion down to 4.1 billion deficit. The whole lot, she's made the whole lot back. And it didn't require quite such severe public service cuts and welfare cuts as were expected. There's been a bit of jiggery-pokery around the changing from current spending, that's the day-to-day stuff, to capital spending.
Predicted?
Yeah, so that's but largely from aid to defence, which is relatively painless compared with nasty
You called it wizardry
cuts.
when you wrote about it, didn't you?
Yeah, trickery, wizardry, exactly. But ultimately, it hasn't been quite the horror show that some people were fearing.
I mean, we're all in Bloomberg HQ, not in the Commons chamber, and I suspect we'll hear quite quickly from our reporters who will be able to see the looks on Labour MPs' faces, because that was quite striking. When you see the donut around the Chancellor, you've got the PM and then the Cabinet Ministers either side, and obviously they're poker face. But it will be interesting to learn whether, as you say, the mood from the backbenchers is that could have been worse, or, goodness me, even though it wasn't as bad as we thought, it's still going to hurt in our mailboxes and in our constituents' hearts and minds. Dan, are you writing? Are you texting? Are you...
I am looking at the OBR document. I'm not texting my wife.
No, I wasn't going to suggest that. I thought you were trying to get to grips with it.
I think Phil summed it up really nicely. I think when I listened to it, it feels like the OBR handed her a bit of a gift, to be honest with you. I think it's interesting, your point about the politics of it. If you look at where the cuts have landed in terms of getting the headroom back, it's really all welfare. There's a bit on departmental spending. We thought there would be something there. We thought it would probably be a little bit more. But actually, it's all on welfare. And that's really interesting. And the other thing, I'm not sure how to interpret it at the moment, but just getting yourself back to the headroom you had exactly to the decimal point that you had in October, it feels very much like I'm just going to do the absolute minimum possible here to get myself down to the autumn, which is the next staging post.
Yeah, that was my takeaway.
And I think she would have initially thought, I'm going to have to do a lot more here on departmental spending. We're going to have the usual questions about fiscal fiction. Actually, there's been pretty much nothing done on it. There's a small amount of change in departmental spending, but it's not very much. So I think the general takeaway is that she has been given, for me at least, she's been given a bit of a gift from the OBR. I'm not going to sort of start, we can get into this if you want, but whether it's delayed the tough choices, whether the OBR might come back in the autumn and say, look, the economy isn't as strong as we thought. There's a box in the OBR document about tariffs and the impact that could have on the economy. So all of those things taken together, I think she's done the minimum she needed to get through the event.
For me, the headroom being exactly the same is interesting because I think it was criticised that it was low, and it was low back in November. And then to go for the same low number, is it she's got away with the minimum she can do to lessen the political pain? Or is it she hasn't learned that lesson and actually there'll be another fiscal event in 6 months' time that could be yet more painful? And we'll find out in the days ahead, which, when we get the briefing from the Chancellor's team on why they've made that judgment. But before we sort of look ahead, you keep saying the OBR has been very kind to her. They've been kind in being dynamic about how they think planning reforms will in the end deliver the growth that the government wants.
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of bits of it. So there's that bit of it, which we weren't expecting. And we spoke on the podcast previously about all of these policies, and Rachel Reeves said it in her speech. They take a bit of time and you've got to be patient. And sort of point two on the level of the economy after 5 years is not very much. It's peanuts. It's a rounding error on growth and things like that. So it's not very much. So she was sort of given a bit of a boost there. And that actually, because of that, it meant that the savings she needed to find in terms of spending cuts were smaller, because if the economy is bigger, it generates more tax receipts. That's a good news story for her. And the other side of it is, we've spoken about this before as well, is that the OBR is at the top end of the pack, if not at the top of the pack when it comes to growth forecasts. And that stems from a view about productivity growth. And they've sort of made a point in their document that they think the level of productivity will be a bit lower than they thought in October. But actually, if you look at the growth numbers, they're still pretty strong. You're not shy of 2% in most years. And that, given recent history...
We'll take that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Given recent history, we would definitely take that relative to the consensus view and certainly relative to our view. So I think going back to this point of moving to the autumn, we'll see what the OBR says. They'll have a briefing as well. But whether they're going to sort of look at this in more detail over the next 6 months or so, that's going to be something very important to watch, as of course is what's going on globally, particularly with the tariffs.
What does the tariff box say?
So it's basically, I can't remember the specifics, but it's basically saying if you get 20%, that was it. If you get 20% of tariffs across the world, as Trump is threatening, that'll knock 1% off GDP, and all her headroom is gone, just like that. So Trump will eliminate her headroom again. But then there's other mechanisms as well. They say, should our productivity forecast be changed and lowered, then she loses her headroom and more. There's a couple of other warnings in there. I think, again, there's a debt interest risk, etc. So they are pointing out again that this is a tight margin for sort of insurance that she's left herself.
That's the point, is it doesn't, of course it matters to people's lives whether these things happen, but purely in terms of setting fiscal policy, if you set yourself, or you set aside a big buffer, then whether the OBR downgrades the productivity forecast, whether Trump hits us with tariffs, you're safe. You're not having to go after and constantly rebuild. And every fiscal event is just this obsession with the headroom. If you have a broader fiscal strategy where you've set yourself some money aside, and of course you'll come back to me, Allegra, and you'll say, well, they haven't got the options for that. They can't raise taxes. Spending's too tight. Okay. They won't. Welfare cuts. Welfare cut. I'm just like heading off at the pass. But welfare cuts, they've not gone too far, but they've already done that.
It's a luxury she doesn't have.
You're caught between the politics of it, which is about the 9.9 where we sort of started, and that there's just no political appetite to go further than that because of the choices it involves. And you're caught on the other side of all these potential economic shocks that could hit you. And I guess the path that they think is the path of least resistance is that the government takes incremental action at every fiscal event, which is not, in an ideal world, that's not how you'd set fiscal policy.
I mean, you'd like to think she's got a Hail Mary. She's got something she can see that she can do between now and the autumn in order to make that not be the case. Phil's raising his eyebrows. The reason I'm saying that is because we all know that because of the headroom being so small, the story will start up tomorrow or right now. What will she do? What taxes will she increase? And that isn't just, how annoying, the British press is so annoying, though obviously she will be starting to think that. But it's also about confidence. And it's also about families making choices about the future, which she needs people, to be quite kind of bullish about.
That's definitely the risk, is that we get back into that terrible cycle of like, what is she going to do next? And you end up with the policy uncertainty. The fact This time, though, the positive for her this time is that the markets have actually responded positively. Yeah. And actually immediately after the budget in October, there was a big shift up in borrowing costs, which effectively had wiped her whole headroom out within days. The reaction this time looks like it's going the other way. So, if there is a Hail Mary, it may be that the markets are beginning to swing behind the Labour agenda, and that could help her. Obviously, the other things out there in the world, you just can't ever plan for this stuff, which is why you should have 25 billion of headroom, because it gives you enough to absorb any shocks. But they haven't done that. So outside of, something external, which they'll blame on the world is changing, as is now the repeated mantra, this appears to have been received a lot better than October.
You mentioned there the Labour agenda and the market swinging behind it. You guys did this amazing piece of work that was in one of our podcasts recently about that's the scorecard, we'll call it. You called it. And you gave numbers out of 10 for each area. And obviously 7 out of 10 you gave to planning. And today the OBR's kind of done the same.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've been saying it for a while, of all the things that Labour they've announced, I think they've announced a lot of positive things. So investment spending, they've lifted that. So it's at least flat as a share of GDP. It was falling as a share of the GDP before. Planning reform. You obviously have to take it, as we said in the scorecard, slightly with a pinch of salt, in that getting up to 300,000 homes a year is basically doubling the number of homes that are built every year. So it's quite a big number and a big move. Nonetheless, the economic benefit from it, which the OBR have recognised, I mean, it's not huge. 0.2% on the level of GDP isn't massive, but it's not nothing. And I think the OBR, going back to your question to Phil about questions in Downing Street about the OBR, are they getting people's backs up? I think they have certainly lowered the bar for scoring policies like this and putting it into the forecast. So things like planning reform, things like labour supply.
So that's new, is it?
Well, it has been new over the past few years. So Jeremy Hunt's NICS cuts, they scored positively. Obviously, the flip side of the rise in employer national insurance in October was that they scored that negatively for the economy, but capital expenses, they scored that positively sort of in the medium term to long term. And they hadn't been doing that. So I think they're listening, certainly, to the criticisms that have been made. But as I said at the start, these things do take time. But I think the planning reform thing, yes, of all the things that have been announced, that's, if you're trying to get out of the sort of malaise and thinking about, that's the most exciting policy for me that Labour have announced. They've come out and they seem pretty serious about making inroads into the planning system as well.
Phil, other bits of the scorecard, would you make any changes in the quite brutal numbers you gave some of the other bits of the agenda?
I suppose we could raise the labour market. We had the 1 out of 10 score for their efforts to get employment up to 80%. And you could say that some of the welfare changes may deliver some change, some positive change there. And I think the OBR has one of the generous gifts that, as Dan put it, that they've given them is a sort of better labour market outlook. So they're just saying that the picture is generally a little bit more positive there. So maybe we could go from 1 to 3.
I suspect that's a pretty good place to leave it. And you both have to write now, don't you?
Try to,
yeah.
All right. Dan Hanson, Phil Aldrick, thank you very much. Thanks for listening to this week's In the City from Bloomberg. This episode was hosted by me, Allegra Stratton. It was produced by Summer Sadi and Moses Andam, with sound design by Blake Maples. Brendan Francis Newnham is our executive producer. Special thanks to Dan Hanson and Phil Aldrick. Please subscribe, rate and review wherever you listen to podcasts.